Lee, I thought you're going.
Yeah. Oh, you're starting as usual.
Oh,
Steve.
I'm starting. I thought you
as
said
usual. Sure.
Oh, okay. You know. Okay.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Cutting Edge with Dr. Lee Pierson, Dr. Robert Stubblefield, and we have two special guests today. Dr. Harry Binswanger, who is currently in a storm, and so he's doing his best, and his video and audio are cutting out. And then we also have Jeff Frenkel, who is a homeschooling father or a homeschooler. And he is, the discussion today is the psycho-epistemology of play. And so I will turn it to Lee.
All right. So let me just say a few words about a couple of words about our guest, not our guest dog. I don't know where he is, but Jeff is a data scientist. I'm not sure what that is exactly. I don't know Jeff very well, but he seems to be a smart fellow, and he does something in data science in New York City. And
Chicago.
I'm sorry.
Chicago.
I don't know why I thought it was New York City. I had that in my head. Chicago. Well, that's good, because we will meet in person, because in a few weeks, and if possible, I mean, if it works out, in a few weeks, we're going to a conference in Chicago. Shoshana Milgram and I are going to the Social Science History Association conference, where we're going to deliver some papers, and maybe we can meet up with you then. Anyway, Jeff has a very important resource for today's discussion, namely a bright 6-year-old child that he owns, or she owns him, or something. Maybe they both have rights. I don't know, something like that. So thanks, Jeff, for showing up. And we have Dr. Harry Binswanger, who we had before, who, it's hard to introduce Dr. Binswanger. I'm thinking of it in terms of how you describe mystical knowledge. For those who know him, no introduction is necessary. For those who don't, you can't really do it. There's too many things to talk about. But he's, a philosopher, and one important thing I like to remind people about: he's the author of a very interesting, important book, How We Know. And he's very interested in, of course, psychoepistemology, and this topic of psychoepistemology for children. He has some interesting things to say. So that should get us started. Let me ask Jeff to go first here. And then we're going to go with Jeff, Harry, and Lee, if that's all right with everybody. We'll go with that, Bob and Steve. And we'll forget about the titles. Anyway, let's start with Jeff. Tell us something about what you want to do with your child, and what specifics you have already thought of yourself. And then we'll see if we can add on to that.
Yeah, thanks. First of all, thanks a lot for having me on. It's a pleasure to speak with you, with all of you guys. I really appreciate it. So I've been an objectivist probably about 5 years now. And just, first learning objectivism, you kind of get a sense of the importance of just cognitive function, and just like how to see the world as knowable. And you have a child, and that kind of, as you watch your child develop from an infant, just grasping, just a sense of being, just looking around, as they develop cognitively, right? You can definitely tell that there's certain ways of knowing, right? And a lot of it is at the very beginning is, of course, highly perceptual. And my daughter right now, she just turned 6 a little while ago, and I've been homeschooling her for about 1.5 years. And I was fortunate enough to get a curriculum together. A lot of it was through Lisa Van Dam. She helped me out a lot at the beginning as a homeschool dad, just working on getting some math, and of course Harry's book, How We Know, and then Leonard Peikoff's famous book, Teaching Johnny to Think. I mean, these are all like very seminal works. So I kind of try to put that together. And as I started teaching her, I was just very cognizant of the way of the way we use, I use words with her, just how I wanted her to get a sense that the world is knowable. Everything was geared towards, there's a causality in everything. There's a reason. I just wanted to just make the sense that she can make sense of the world around her. And, it starts off, there's many different ways, kind of different strategies that as I'm doing math with her, I found that one avenue was really important, and that's kind of just off the bat, especially the perceptual level where she was at about 5, just learning numbers, right? And so, for example, like one strategy that I use is kind of showing her that you can see the same thing in many different forms. And so, for example, when we were first learning the number 3, right, I could point out there were 3 different things. Let's say like 3 bananas. And I'd say 1, 2, 3, and that would be 3. And then I would also actually say, well, there's another way to do 3. You can actually spell it out, the word THREE, right? And then now she's starting to see that 2 + 1 also equals 3. And then I actually can even point out to her that the square root of 9, right, also equals 3. And then I was explaining to her that you can see how it's the same thing in very different ways, but but it's still the number 3, right? And then I'm telling her, and I try and kind of relate that to all the different concepts that we do. I try and integrate everything in that way. So if I'm teaching something, I always relate it to something else. I never want to go through anything with her where it's disintegrated and she can't make sense of it. So I'll actually interject and say, how is this like what we just learned like last week, right? Can you put them together? Everything is trying to be connected with her. I always want to just put it together in a way so she can kind of organize her mind in a way that, and her thoughts and her concepts in a way that it's clear to her. And of course, she's very perceptual now. I mean, she's 6, right? But you can actually see the building blocks of the conceptual faculty getting stronger. And now she just started using the word durable. And this was an interesting one for me, right? Because, durable is it's an attribute, but you can't touch it, right? It's not very perceptual. You have to kind of abstract a little bit, right? So she started using the word durable. She was playing with a toy. She's like, this is a durable toy. I said, what do you mean by durable? She says it doesn't break. I said, okay, we'll work with that. Then I wanted to see if she actually really knew what the word meant. So I'm like, what's the opposite of durable? And she thought about it. She said, fragile. And I thought, that's really good. That's really impressive. And I kind of probed her a little bit further. And I said, can you put 3 things in order from least durable to the most durable? And I gave her, I forgot what it was. I think one was like a glass vase. Another one was like a Nerf toy. And then another was like a monster truck. And she thought about it and she got it right. And that gave me confidence that she's using the words and she knows what the concepts mean, at least relative to her level, right? And I think it's really important if I hear her like saying a word and I just think she heard it somewhere, she's parroting it, I'll stop her and I'll kind of do the same type of thing. I always want to make sure she knows the word she's using. She can kind of put it from her conscious and she can actually relate it to her stored knowledge in her subconscious. And so like everything's about training a mind to make sense of the world, right? So and that's really important. And
can I say something here?
Yeah, please, Harry.
Because there's all kinds of problems with what you said. All reducing to one thing, hierarchy. You said she's just learning numbers, and then you said 2 things. You said it's important to get her to recognize differences of form. No, it is not. That is out of order. Form is known way after a lot of content is known in general. So that would be like trying to notice the difference between your sense of sight and your sense of touch when you're learning length. You first have to learn a lot before you can reflect back on the form, which is a difficult thing to do. And specifically when you said the square root of 9 is also 3, if she only knows the basic numbers, how could she understand the square root of 9?
No, I wasn't. Let me correct myself. I actually didn't. I was using that as just an example, right? I kept with the examples with her. It was just 2 + 1, counting 3, and then maybe 4 - 1, right? So it was really, it was only at the level where she knew.
Yeah, okay, that's much better. But you have to be completely sensitive to hierarchy. Durable is a very advanced concept, and the opposite of durable, is I can't even think of the word off the top of my head. I'm sure there is.
She did. She did think. I'm wondering what
fragile. It's not the opposite of durable, but it's close. It's in the ballpark. You're doing it you're doing everything out of order. How high can she count?
She can count to 100, even more. I mean, probably 1,000 actually.
By the way, Jeff, could you, by any chance, close the slats behind you because there's a lot of sun coming in?
Oh, Yeah, sorry, 1 second.
If you could do that, that would be good. I take your point, Harry, but I am intrigued by the fact that she was able to come up with something that showed that she had some kind of understanding. She has some understanding of durable.
Yes.
Even if
yes. So maybe it's your presentation, Jeff, where you were presenting her as learning to count to 3, and you were suddenly presenting what's the square root of 9, but maybe she's much further along than that.
She is. I think I characterized it out of order myself. Everything that I do.
All right, but the principle, 2 principles. One is that form is very sophisticated and should be ignored, and differences in form should be ignored as long as possible. And the second is that you have to be aware of hierarchy. Actually, that subsumes the first.
So,
you have to
Harry,
be very, very careful about hierarchy. That's the which.
How are you using the term form here?
The means or way that something is held. For instance, it would be a fundamental error to teach, 3 can be done in binary as, 1, 1. That would be a fundamental error. And I, even going to the word 1, 2, and 3 is just confusing unless she's got a good grasp and can count very easily and, knows that. But how would she even know how to spell the word if you're projecting that she only knows 1, 2, 3? So you have to explain the simpler by the still simpler, not by the more complex.
Yeah, at that point, at the point that I'm kind of explaining to her that there's different ways of seeing the same thing, right? Different ways of showing the number.
Why do you want to do that?
Why do I want to?
Yeah, it's like, what's the value of that for her when you have to give her a lot of content?
Well, it's by content, and then you can extrapolate that these are all the same thing. There's different ways of showing the same thing. How many times?
Why? It's like, there are 2 or 3 different ways to prove this. Well, first you need to understand what it is to prove something, and that you've done it, and that this works, and get really solid on that, and a lot of proofs before you go into. But there are different ways of doing. It's like if you were doing a physical trip. And this is the way to grandma's. Now, there are other ways. You could go around here and go around. Make sure she's got the way. That's who cares that there are other ways? It's later, much, much later, when sometimes it comes up. But the focus on the means of awareness comes way after the awareness. That's the primacy of existence. And you risk confusing her or making a relativist out of her, something like that.
I was under the impression that if you can kind of go, if she can see the same thing in different ways, as she gets older.
We know that as philosophers, but she's first got to see things.
But it's perceptual things, right? It's perception. The number, she knows 2 + 1 is the same thing as 4 - 1, right? That's the same thing, and right? Wouldn't you consider that? The answer is
no. That is not the same thing. It's equal in value, but the main thing is that she has to learn what subtraction is as a separate topic, and what addition is at first as a separate topic, and then she will see that you get the same answer by different problems. You get 3, whether it's 5 - 2 or 6 - 3, etc. And that's not a very interesting point. The main thing is to know that there's subtraction and how it works. So you're going to the meta level with a child who's trying to establish the object level. It's like the new math.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. It's something that I do my best to keep not impose kind of the way, like the abstract levels, like what you were saying, as we're much more like abstract and conceptual. With her, I try and keep it as basic, and I would never point out to her things that the same that she's not ready for, right? So I only pointed out that 3 is the same, equals the same thing, only after we did addition first, and then after we did subtraction, only then would I make the connection. So I'm not making the connection before she's ready for it. I'm trying to be very cognizant.
Well, okay,
of that.
let's hope that it's the way you're presenting it to us, not the way you're actually teaching her.
Yes.
But be sensitive to. There's not a big value in learning. It's like you say, okay, and aardvark, and the Spanish call it arvacchio, and the Germans call it, that's not what she needs to know. That's a fillip on a very sophisticated, advanced perspective. I see by your silence.
I probably should mention at this point, just so people will know, that Harry is in Naples, Florida, is right under the force of the hurricane, and his power is out. So he's working with a flashlight and an iPhone, and so we're getting occasional, things going out, coming in and going out. I just thought I should mention that. So go ahead. Sorry, go ahead, Jeff.
Well, so I guess my question is, so how do you train, starting, a younger mind to think in essentials from that point? So the thought process is, if she can see similarity in a lot of different things, right? Eventually, starting at the perceptual level, not obviously advancing before she's ready for it, right? How do you train a mind? I guess more generally speaking, how do you train a young, eager mind to think in essentials, right? To grasp the one.
Hierarchy mistake. There's no essentials for the first concept. Everything is essential. If you know nothing and then you know one thing, that's the essential. There is an essential comes when you have a wealth of attributes and you say, I'm overloaded. I know man darn socks. I know that he builds towers. I know that he writes papers. I know that he wears clothes. I know that he's hairless. I know that he thinks. I know that he talks. I know that he walks. And you say, well, what is this all reduced to? But if the only thing you know is that, man walks or something, or two things, there's no essential or non-essential. Essential is a selection from an otherwise confusing quantity to overloaded quantity of material.
And I would add to that maybe this is controversial. So we like controversy here. So we'll see if it is. I think as far as thinking in essentials, I don't know how to do that except by the exercise of imagination. That is of certain thought experiments, like what if the man didn't have socks? What if he didn't have this characteristic and that characteristic? And you do that, and eventually you're able to figure out that if man didn't have the rational faculty, that would change his nature greatly. He wouldn't be a man anymore. And that's the thought process that you go through to establish essentials. This actually is described in ITOE, Introduction to Objective Epistemology. There is a passage where Ayn Rand actually does that little thought experiment on this example, of rationality. And I don't know of another way to do it. So I wouldn't be thinking of teaching how to think in essentials until I've done some work with imagination, a controlled imagination. I think that's something you have to do. Speaking of hierarchy. Anyway, that's my view there.
Yeah, I agree. Thought experiments. You want to know what's essential? It's that which an experimental imagination of leaving out shows you can't leave it out.
Yeah, right. And that's a sophisticated mental process, or somewhat. I mean, it's not rocket science, I guess, but it's something that I don't know exactly. You have to teach. If you're going to teach that, you need to teach the child how to imagine in a controlled manner. And we're back to Jeff. He would know more about it, how well a young child can do that at what age. I don't know for sure.
Well, I can give you, I mean, I can tell you with certainty that, at this point, my daughter, she can basically imagine anything. And when we work through things, she was asking me, we were talking the other day, she said, what makes something alive? This is her, I mean, unsolicited, this is what, she brought up. And then, so I posed a few questions to her. I said, well, I mean, if you can look at two things, right? A tree and a rock, right? She said, well, the tree's alive and the rock is not. And I said, well, how do you know? And she says, well, the tree moves and the rock doesn't, right? And so, and I kind of work with her in that type of an example, right? And we go and we just talk through things, we think through, and I kind of just pose questions to her. I just want to say, well, does the color, I mean, I try and does the color of something matter, whether it's alive or not? And then she said, well, I don't think so. She's like, I don't think color matters that much, and then, so we use this dialogue back and forth. And, I'm not sure if and I hope that I'm advancing it in kind of in this way where she can eventually focus on, on what's important and what's essential in the thing. Maybe that comes later. Maybe that she just needs enough content. And then eventually the method of thinking will come a little bit later.
Why did you pick a tree? Why did you pick a tree?
She brought it up. She said, I mean, she at first she's like, she brought up the difference between a tree and a rock. She was curious because they both don't move much. But she's like, I know the tree's alive. And then I was like, how do you know the tree's alive and the rock is not? And that's how we got into that discussion, because she's very curious. I take actually every afternoon I try and take a walk with her.
What did she
look
answer?
At animals.
What is her answer?
She said the rock never moves and never eats.
Well, of course, rocks do move. They roll down hills and things.
Well, the rock, she was looking at a big boulder.
And trees don't move very much. I think doing it in terms of motion is going to be hard to do, because there are lots of non-living things move, and some living things don't move, including even some animals, that barnacles and such. So there's some other pathway besides that one, I think.
So the other thing that I was hoping to speak with you guys about is when a child, so like my daughter, she'll ask questions about concepts that I know she's not ready for. And so it's just, and I always want to I'm almost torn between kind of reining her back in to what she's comfortable with, but I never want to stifle that imagination, right? So it's kind of this balance as we're doing things, I just kind of, I go back and forth on it. I don't really know the answer to that.
Why did she, can you give an example and tell us?
Yeah, can you remember one for us?
Well, this one, I mean, when she asked the difference, how do you explain to a child that a rock is not alive? Because the thing is, she brought up unsolicited. She knew the tree was alive and the rock was not. And then,
well, she heard that.
She heard that, right? So it's not now. I wouldn't call it knowledge, right? But she was.
Life is a tough case. I'm not sure that I can give a definition of life right now. I'm not sure a biologist can.
Yeah.
And Ayn Rand didn't attempt to give an actual definition. Oh, it's not hard. Harry, okay.
Yes, of course. Look at the differences. What happens if you cut into a tree? The tree sap runs out because there's stuff inside it, and the tree either heals that. It's like when you get a cut in your body, or it starts to die. At least the stuff around it starts to die. What happens if a tree doesn't get water? Now, a rock, what happens if you cut a rock in two? Well, you have two rocks. What happens if a rock doesn't get water? Nothing. Was the tree always that size? She may not know, but trees start as seeds and then they grow to be little trees, and you can point to them. So they grow, and rocks don't grow, right? Nor do they die. Do trees die? Have you ever seen a dead tree? Does a rock die? So you can explain it, but it'd be a lot easier if you took a dog. And that's what I would have said to her as methodology. Well, trees are living, but they're not as clear to understand first as a dog. Now, what's the difference between a dog and a rock? And then she could, say that. And you say, well, is something like that going on in the tree? Is the tree moving inside? Don't the leaves fall off because the sap comes out of them and then it grows them back? So you do it that way through a lot of facts that she has access to. But I would first say, it's always good to take a strong contrast. Like when I asked you what's the opposite of durable and you said fragile, you probably pictured in your mind, use least point, a glass breaking, or do you remember what you pictured in your mind?
Yeah, I think
and she probably had concrete. Huh?
Yeah. So the other thing that I'll do when she uses a concept or something like a vocabulary word that I'm not sure she knows, I'll give her like 3 examples of something and I'll ask her to pick it. So I sort of pick like the most durable of something, and then she would be able to kind of rank them, right? And of course it's very contextual to what she knows. But I'm always cognizant that I always want her to know the words that she's using, at least to her own state. I think it's important that the children don't start throwing around words. And, it's just one of those things, right? Especially as they get older, a lot of times we'll see people use words and, floating abstractions. They'll have no idea what the words mean, or they'll be hazy about it. So I'm always cognizant of that with her when we're going through something. And if I suspect that she's using a word she doesn't know, I'll be like, did you hear that word somewhere? How do you know? Like, it's one of those things. I think it's just important as I'm working with her. I'm not sure if that's necessarily the right thing, but I think that just logically makes the most sense to me. When we're going through different curriculum, different stuff together.
Yeah.
So what do you guys think, Jeff and Harry, of the Montessori premise, or what I understand to be the Montessori premise, which is that the child knows what level of hierarchy and complexity to operate at. That the child will choose the right level, and that you don't have to impose it. What do you guys think of that? I take that to be the Montessori idea. Maybe that's wrong, but I think that's basically what they there's a problem in that educators have recognized of they don't usually talk about hierarchy so much, but I guess they could, but complexity anyway. That there's the issue of getting the right level of complexity, and the Montessorian solution is to let the child determine that and choose herself in this case. So Harry has disappeared. So anyway, Jeff, any thoughts on that? Do you let her lead the way, or do you impose a lot of content on the discussion? How do you do that?
Well, it goes both ways. Like, for example, if I'm working with, on a science lesson with her, I use mystery science. I know actually some objectivists found it a long time ago. I'm not sure the backstory of it, but I love it. I think it's great. For example, when we were classifying, mammals, it was one of those things where she'll propose, like, let's say, like a monkey, right? She says, "Oh, I know a monkey is a mammal." Right. Now, this is unsolicited, right? Because we were learning, we use a different, I think when we're actually going through the curriculum, there wasn't a monkey. I think there was just a different mammal. And then she actually unsolicited, she said, well, a monkey also doesn't lay eggs, right? It gives birth to live animals. So she so there's definitely some truth to that. And I can sense, she wouldn't provide obviously an example she's not ready for, but if I start kind of dictating examples, she may, I'm always also cognizant. I don't want her to kind of just appease me. And, as her dad, I don't know if it's a different dynamic with an actual teacher. I'm not actually a teacher by training. I just as much as I've been just following objectivism and just the way, I'm kind of I'm not winging it necessarily, but I'm very cognizant of hierarchy. I'm cognizant of a lot of different things that help the conceptual faculty develop. But again, I may be, there's definitely, I'm not infallible, right? I can definitely make a mistake and things. So I always want her to provide examples, and then I can work off of those than me just kind of dictating the example to her.
Okay. I bring that up partly because I think that principle has some truth, but at some point in the educating process, I think it is very, in my opinion, it's very important for the teacher to impose the structure and not leave it to the student, because that's exactly what the difference between a teacher and a student is. That's the teacher should know something, unlike, unfortunately, many teachers today, and the student is ignorant, and you have to, so the teacher has to impose structure at least at some point in the process. I'm not sure at what age that is, but I think that's true. Harry's gotten back on.
And I comment on that.
Yes.
I think it's important. The other principle of objectivist epistemology is context. And I think it's important, if you're going to criticize Montessori, to say that aside from a few criticisms, she's a genius who really did marvelous work that is phenomenal in its closeness to the objectivist epistemology. Now, on this particular one, I've never heard that before, that they know what hierarchy they're at. You sure that's in there?
No, I don't know about I'm not sure. It's usually, this point is usually expressed, and not just by Montessorians, other people talking about Montessori. So I'm not sure of the whole thing, but the point is usually expressed in terms of complexity, that there is a appropriate level of complexity for the child to be operating at. And the Montessori solution to the problem of, they call this the problem of the match, this is called. You can find it in an introduction to one of Montessori's books, and I forget which one it is. Anyway, it's called the problem of the match. And the idea is that you have to match your instruction, the level of complexity, to make it appropriate for what the child's situation. And one answer to it is to let the child select that level, which the Montessori materials allow the child to do. And I think that can work. It does work for Montessori. I don't think it works for teaching, for example, science. I don't think so. I don't think the child is in a position to make that kind of selection for complex conceptual material. The perceptual material of that Montessori instruction is based on is appropriate for that kind of method. Anyway, that's my thought on that.
But Montessori is a big advocate of the structured environment. And she lets the child choose which of the puzzles that she's created. And that finally takes us back to what this session is about. Right, which is, I said puzzle. It was the psychoepistemology of play. That isn't what I understood. It was teaching a child psychoepistemology through play. Is that your understanding?
Well, that's what motivated the title. I wasn't thinking of restricting the discussion to just that, but that's right. That is something that I know you have something, Harry, that's a big subject for you. And well, let's see how we're doing here. So, Jeff, you want to say a few things, bring up a few more points, and then let me move over to Harry. You can talk about games for children in a moment here. But what do you think, Jeff? What else would you like?
I would just add that I think just like playing. I know for example, I know my daughter actually went to Montessori from 3 to 4, and then right as the pandemic started, we kind of made the decision to homeschool. So she did go there for about a year and a half, and you can see the mastery of the perceptual grasp. The emphasis on Montessori is she became everything was tactile. She was getting very advanced at that point in time. And it was just I almost just at that point when the pandemic ended, we made a decision to homeschool. But yeah, I know during the day, for example, play is so important for young children, right? So if she's when we structure our day, I know, for example, if she's actually playing with her toys and I had a lesson plan, I will never interrupt her, almost on principle. If she's playing, I just won't. I love the independent way she's working, she's playing, she's organized, she's imagining, right? I think that's in some context at that age, it might even be as important as actually a structured curriculum, just in terms of just developing her awareness of what she's doing and how, and then she'll call me over and she'll tell me what she did, and she's so proud of it. And then she gets a sense of pride of putting things together. And, I think that's really important in terms of, especially developing a good psychoepistemology, right? She's aware of what she did. She's aware of how to explain it. She knows what she knows how to communicate it. And I think, so especially with playing, I'm really big on that. I think it's wonderful.
Okay, that sounds good to me. I think that that goes along with the Montessori idea that psychologists call intrinsic motivation. Intrinsic doesn't necessarily have the philosophical baggage that it does in philosophy. But anyway, that the activity itself is motivating. If the child chooses it, the child is going to choose a motivating activity, and play is certainly a motivated activity. And if you can combine instruction and play, I think that's a good thing. But we just lost Harry again. He's gone, disappeared. I don't know what will happen. So, okay, Jeff, anything else while we're waiting for Harry to come back?
Well, I'll add one more thing. The other day, she was playing with my daughter. She loves construction trucks, like bulldozers. So she took a Lego she made and she put it on the bulldozer, and she said, "Dad, look, I'm making Legos on top of my bulldozer." And I said, "Isn't that what a lot of like scientists do when they invent things? They come up with things, they rearrange things in the world, right?" And she's like, "Yeah, that's." And so I'm trying to make the connection that a lot of what we do as adults, where we have reality. We have, of course, I wouldn't be this abstract with her, but I say in a way that's much more relative to her context. But this is what we do as adults. We take things and we rearrange them. We put them in ways that make it work for us, right? And I think I try to emphasize that when she plays, and then she goes back and looks at the toy. She's like, "Yeah, I did that." It's just, you can see that what you're talking about, that intrinsic motivation, the affirmation that she's doing something productive, right? And it's really important that, and as a parent, as a teacher, to her, I think I'm like proud to see that. I think it's really, you can kind of see the joy that she gets from it, and it's good to see. It's just happy. It makes me happy to see that.
Well, so Harry has disappeared. I don't know what's going to happen with him. Let me go ahead and say a couple of things myself. And what I have to say here is tentative, because I don't know at what age the things I want to happen can happen exactly. But as you know, I'm very interested in the role of introspection in cognitive processes. I think it's, in my opinion, it's the most important cognitive skill that isn't taught in school at any level officially by anybody that I know of. But I think it's very important because of the relation of introspection. And by introspection, what I mean here is conceptually identifying what is going on in your conscious mind, conceptual identification. So that's a little bit different than the usual conception of introspection as being sort of a quasi-perceptual kind of activity. I think of it more as it's a form of thinking. It's thinking about thinking, if you will. And I would want children to learn that at whatever age it's appropriate for them to do so. Now, I do know of some research that indicated that 8-year-olds have a lot of, this is old research, it's 40 some years old by now, in developmental psychology, that indicated they found that 8-year-olds knew pretty much the same facts about memory that psychologists know, memory psychologists. They know things like you remember things that more recent or further away. If there's a sequence of things, you remember the things early and late better than the things in the middle. They know that rehearsal helps. You say it over and over in your mind, you repeat in your mind the thing you're trying to remember over and over again. They know that clustering, that is putting things together in terms of similarity, that helps in memory. They know a lot of the things anyway. They know about inhibition, that if you learn one thing and learn something similar later, that might interfere with what you've learned. So they know a lot of the stuff by the time they're 8 years old, which suggests to me some definite introspective ability at that age, and that maybe that could be trained further, or at least you can encourage your child to try to be introspective. That is to try to ask questions about what's going on in themselves, questions about what's going on in their mind. Try to identify if there's a gap in their thinking, if there's something that they need to, if there's something that they're thinking about that they need to activate more knowledge about than they have. If there's some concept they're thinking about, and well, I don't really know exactly what that means. I need to think about that more. That's the kind of question. And in order to get to that, I like to stress the importance of paying attention to inklings. That's the word I use for feelings about thoughts. And I think young children can do that. Again, I'm not sure at what age, but you can encourage a child to pay attention to the feeling that's like a rock in your shoe when you're reading something. I think comprehension is an excellent area to develop skills, psycho-epistemological skills of introspection and identifying issues, because comprehension, both reading and oral comprehension of people talking to you, in both cases comes up pretty much every day, and there are issues there of ideas slipping by too quickly, that anybody can let something slip by too quickly when they're trying to comprehend, and so it's important to be able to identify that and fix it. And I think that can be learned by young children, but I'm not sure if 6 is the appropriate time. I just don't know. But I would try to get some idea of, can a child, can your child's, let's say, understand what it means to have a feeling about a thought. I have a feeling that there's something I don't quite get here. There's something that doesn't quite hang together here. Does she have any sense of that? So that, the difference between really understanding something and having the feeling of, aha, I got it, versus the feeling of, uh-oh, there's something a little wrong here, and I need to do more thinking about this, because that's exactly the sort of thing that a child needs to know about in order to direct volitional action. Because volition, free will is really about, fundamentally, what we have direct control over is the mental effort of attention. We control, we can impel by choice. We can think about something more or not, but what's needed there's guidance needed about the what you're thinking about, whatever it is. You don't want it to be random, you want it to be guided, and that's where I think introspection plays. So anyway, Jeff, do you think is that possible to teach a 6-year-old some of these things? Do you know, does she have the ideas already of, I really understand this very well. Aha, I got it. The light bulb went on, and she knows what that experience is like, as against the rock and shoe feeling of, there's something wrong here. Maybe I don't know quite what it is, but there's something wrong and I need to do something about it. Does she have those feelings and know anything about that? What can you tell me, Jeff?
Well, I would say when we're going through something, a lot of times she comes across very certain of what she's saying, right? So I don't think she's aware of partial uncertainty, right? And if she knows something, she's very aware that she knows it. And then it's my job to be an arbiter of that, right? So that's where before, when she says a word or concept, right, that we're using, I'll probe her on the definition. I wouldn't ask her what's the definition of this, but I would say, can you use it in a sentence? If I give you 3 things, can you kind of classify according to what she's talking about? And that helps her think through it. And then afterwards, I'll say, do you think you know this idea better than before? And she'll think about it. Yeah, and I do that a lot. I'm like, do you think you know more now than before, or maybe before we did this lesson, right? And can you relate this lesson to what we did before? I think a lot of introspection is consciously focusing her mind on what we've done, and kind of finding similarities, finding differences. Always kind of never doing anything in isolation. I think that's one thing that I think is really, So is she actually learning introspection? I mean, it's hard to say definitively, but I definitely think, for her level of cognitive development, I think I'm making progress, and it'd be really interesting to see, by the time she's 8, 9, how advanced it can get. But there's not also much out there on how to do this, and because when I research, I'll find a curriculum, I'll find a topic of interest, and then a lot of it is on me to kind of make it to assess her knowledge and assess. Is she able to introspect? Is she able to be aware of what she knows, aware of what she doesn't know? And I'll use a little bit of context, but I'm getting a little bit better at that, and I think it's really important. I wish there was a way to systematize it. I don't really, off the top of my head, I don't really know of any way to do that. Well, if you can
ask her again, I think any kind of comprehension is a good area for developing the skill, because it comes up so often throughout one's life every day. You have to comprehend both written and oral materials, and if you can ask her when has either read something or listened to something, how well do you understand this? Is that a question you can ask her that she can give an answer to? And then if she says, well, I understand it pretty well, but I don't understand it totally, then the next thing I would do is, what in particular can you be more specific about what you don't totally understand? Can she identify what I like to call a key concept? I think that's what you do in introspection, is you try to zero in on key concepts by which I mean, when I use that term, what I mean by that is something that's important, but not, you haven't activated all the knowledge you need to about it. I'll give you my classic example for this, and maybe you can try this on her. It's an arithmetic question. Let me just think for a second, make sure I got the right. 10 birds are sitting on a wire. All but 7 fly away. How many are left? Okay. I'm really interested to hear what happens when you try this on her, because she could do this, obviously. But what a lot of people say, quickly, is they say 3.
Yeah.
Well, what happened? Now, that's wrong, right? So, what happened there, the way I analyze that is that it's very easy to slip, for your mind to slip by too quickly on the concept but. But, if you actually slow down and identify that that's a key concept and think about what but means. Well, what does but mean? If you can reformulate it, you'll be able to see that I would reformulate it as something like, if I had to think, just focus on that, which I'm recommending here, is it means something like other than. And if you substitute other than in there, all of those 10 birds other than 7 flew away. For me, that works. I don't know if that works for everybody, but anyway, some kind of activation of knowledge like that, reformulation, if you get it wrong, will enable you to get it right. And that's what I mean by introspection. There is identifying the but as the concept that you need to zero in on and exert volitional effort about. So I don't know at what age this could be done, but I'd be interested for you to try her out. She could answer that very question. She's certainly got enough math machinery to answer that very question. But she might get it wrong, and that would be useful, because then you could say, well, how sure are you? Are you sure that's right? Is there something funny going on there? Is there something that you didn't quite understand? Is there a word in there that you need to think about more? That's those sorts of introspective questions could then be asked, and she could get, encouraged to ask herself those kinds of questions, which would be tremendously, powerful, I think, tremendously powerful if she could develop her ability to do that.
I think you honed in on the reformulation, right? The key concepts is really, that does come across everywhere and everything. It doesn't even matter the subject, history or science, right?
Doesn't matter.
Comprehension is it's everywhere. So that's why I think I hone in on those words, and I always want to kind of probe her knowledge, right? And then maybe we do that enough, and then eventually, after she hears me ask those questions, she'll kind of know what I'm going to say. So she might actually implicitly already be aware of how much she knows something, because she'll kind of know the questions that I'm going to be asking, right? So I don't know if we're there yet, but maybe, as time goes on, that's one way to train a child's mind to be aware, of the concepts that they're using, those key concepts, and maybe introspect in that fashion.
I've seen much older students than she that when they read something, they read as if there's just one way of reading. It's whatever happens to when they put their eyes over the page, and maybe they do a little thinking, more or less automatically. Whatever automatically happens is what they settle for. And in many cases, I think they don't even grasp that you could do better. You can get more than what comes to mind automatically. They don't think that. They just think that's what I am. I'm this machine. And I look at stuff, and when I read it over, I understand what I understand. And if I didn't get it, I didn't get it. But they don't realize that if they could guide their directed attention, volitional attention better, they could do better comprehension. That's what I try to get students to recognize. And both in any kind of comprehension, but that of course leads over to all other cognitive activities like problem solving and analyzing arguments and creative thinking. All of those things require directing your attention better. And many students, even much older students, high school, college kids, do not grasp the extent to which they could have more control over their own minds. which is what psychoepistemology is about. So anything you can do to get her to grasp the fact that she has a certain level of control, not an infinite level, it's not omniscience, omnipotence, but she has a definite level of control over her own thought processes. To the extent you can get her to realize that and what that consists in, which is directing your attention, if you can do that, I think that would be a tremendous cognitive achievement.
You know, another thing we do, Lee, is we'll play this game, and we'll be in the car driving, and then she'll look out, and maybe she'll see like a mountain or something. And I'll ask, is that natural or man-made? Right. I think that's one really cool thing. I don't really know if this actually has any cognitive benefit, especially for introspection, but I think it's just important. And it eventually she'll I'm like, that car, is that natural or did somebody have to invent it? And then we do that for a lot of different things. And then I'll kind of point out to her, I'm like, well, is there anything you can notice about things that are man-made versus things that are natural? And, and then I kind of probe knowledge. And I'm not sure if that actually gets at introspection, but it does kind of, maybe in a tangential way, she'll be aware of what we have control over. And I always want to point out like the facts of reality to her if possible, right? And I think that's just one way. That's one thing that I do with her. I don't really know if that, if that's kind of aligned with what you're referring to, but I think it might help in some capacity.
Yeah, anything you can do that gives her a sense of how much, the extent to which she has volitional control over her own thought processes. Which, again, I just noticed that a lot of students have very little sense of that. They kind of think of themselves as machines, or they have this much sense. A lot of your better students will think something like this: if I just try harder, I'll get it. All I have to do is try hard. And so they're these good, they're really good students. They want to do well and they try hard, but of course that doesn't, in general, that doesn't work. Just trying hard. As the great, I like to quote the great 20th century philosopher Curly Howard, I'm trying to think, but nothing happens. That's I've seen that so often. I'm talking about the better students. The weaker students, they don't care, and they don't want to think, and they just, if something happens to fall into their head, that they'll settle for that. But the better students want to think, but they think it reduces, that thinking reduces to trying harder. And of course, that's where introspection comes in. It doesn't really reduce to trying hard. You can do better than that if you can introspect and determine what direction you really ought to be directing your thinking. So that's why I put so much importance on that. But again, I'm not quite sure at what age to bring up the where people can do what. We've got something back online. I don't know if it's Harry. I think we may have to do.
Is.
Okay. I think what we may have to do, Harry, is bring you on. You think you can get the hurricane out of Florida by a couple of weeks from today, do you think, and come back?
Yeah, let's see. What is that? Early October or mid-ish?
Yeah, like that. I'm not. Yes, like that.
I was also going to recommend that because I want to very much hear what Harry has to say about child playing games that would improve psychoepistemology.
Yeah, and we've only got a couple minutes. If you want to say something now, tease us a little bit, Harry, but I think we're going to have to all right. Come back.
I'll give you the direction. Let me give you the direction. I'll repeat it again when I'm on with more time, just so you know what I'm talking about. Lee made the point in introduction to this. Lee made the point we should teach children how to think and how to introspect from an early age. And I had never thought of that, but it sounded great. So I was already aware of some games that do teach that, although the teacher doesn't draw that lesson. And the easiest one is Simon Says, which, how that's played. The teacher says, you can only take the action. I don't know, but they use this a simpler word than action because it's for about 4-year-olds. If I say Simon Says, so if I say, put your foot out you don't do it. But if I said, Simon says, put your foot out, then you can do it. And she does a few. Simon says, do this, Simon says that. And then she just comes out with one not prefaced by, quote, Simon says, quote. And half of the kids, or 3/4, will do it. And she could say, now, in order to win at this game, you have to keep saying to yourself, did Simon say it? Is Simon saying it? Is Simon saying it? I mean, not that frequently, but every few seconds, you have to prepare yourself by saying to yourself, is Simon saying this? Listen for Simon says. I can think of simpler examples, but that's the one that came to me.
Mhm.
And they learned that they can say things to themselves in their minds that makes a difference to whether they win a game or not. I mean, it's not a competitive game, whether they succeed at a game or not. So that was my example that I figured it out from. But there's a lot of things you can do, and we'll discuss them at another time.
All right, let's do that. Jeff,
Okay.
you would be up for that, I hope.
Oh, of course.
So we'll try to organize that for next time if we can. And,
Okay, let's
and
get
hope
our
that there are no hurricanes. Go ahead, Steve. Steve has a question.
Yeah, our
or-
super chatter. Let's get this.
Yeah,
We
good.
from friend Harper for $4.99. It's just a comment.
Okay.
He or she says Jean Maroney's 8 family of emotion has been very valuable to me in the realm of introspection. That's something in her thinking lab, I believe.
Okay. I'm not familiar with that particular. Harry would know, but of course,
it's a classification.
Okay, introspection, as used in objectivism, is usually introspection directed towards emotion. That's the way it's usually presented. In fact, in every single lecture and written thing I've ever seen about it in objectivism, that's the way, and that's perfectly valid. I'm talking about something a little different about when talking about introspection on the thought process. So how that relates
that's what psychoepistemology is introspection of your thought or monitoring is that introspection of of the cognitive processes. Yeah. So she's definitely was in favor of that.
Yeah. Okay. Sure.
But you're right.
Yep.
You're right. It hasn't been discussed much, if at all. Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a reason for that, but we'll take it up next. We'll take all that up next time because we are now about ready to. Something else, Steve? Anything else out there?
I was just going to say the theme, or what we focused mostly on, is the importance of what Dr. Binswanger calls center of the page examples. Borderline issues are very problematic for a child. Would that be?
Well, it's problematic for adults too.
Of course.
we have trouble with them too. My own view of that is, you should start with the center of the page, but you should also, I think you should also deal with the extreme cases. And the extreme cases can be very, very revealing. This is another topic, I guess, but I think, for example, in physics, you gain insight into a lot of physical situations by formulating them in terms of extremes. And so that's important to do at some point. And I don't know, again, what point that is to do that with children, because I would start with center of the page stuff. In any subject, that's what you want to start with, at least. Harry looks like he wants to jump in there. You flashed for a second.
No, I was just agreeing with you. And when I taught at college, I would standardly give 3 examples for every point. One would be real easy textbooky example. The second would be a little more complicated, but still center of the page example, so they see it's not a trivial thing. And then the third would be some sexy, controversial example. Like if you were talking about faking reality, which wasn't in my class notes. So first thing would be a person hates another person and he turns away, hoping that if he doesn't see the person, he won't be there. Or he pretends that he's done something that he hasn't to get praise. And then the second one, I didn't prepare this example, but the second one, I would try to make it, a little bit more substantive, like a used car salesman turns the odometer back, faking what the mileage is on the car. And then the third one might be inflation, where the government is trying to fake the supply of capital by lowering the interest rates to where they would be if there were more capital. So that would be, very controversial and get the class excited and thinking I'm crazy, which is always my goal.
All right, we better, Steve, you better wrap us up so we can go to Clubhouse.
Okay.
If you will.
Well, let's thank our guest, Jeff Frenkel and Dr. Harry Binswanger for being in a storm and being such a philosophical committed to the cause. Thank you, Dr. Binswanger, and we'll see everyone over at Clubhouse if they can make it.